Joining us right now is Senator Kevin Cramer of North Dakota. He is a part of a group of Republican senators who's calling on the Biden administration to make sure that it keeps selling oil and gas leases in federal waters. Senator Cramer, Jamie Dimon speaking pretty bluntly about things, as he tends to do. He's of the opinion that it's almost too late. Do you think that's the case?
Well, Becky, yesterday would have always been better than tomorrow, but tomorrow's better than waiting another week or a month or 6 months or a year. But his fundamental point is right in that what's distracted a lot of investment in the oil industry and the gas industry and other fossil industries is the long-term prospects of a return on that investment. You can send the right price signals today, and you'll get investment. We know how to produce a lot more oil and gas, and we can get back at it, but investors have to see a long-term return.
What are the keys that you think the administration should be doing to push that, to promote that at this point?
Well,
because energy companies have a lot of incentive when you look at prices.
No, that's exactly right. But on the one hand, probably the easiest thing is to lift the prohibition on federal leasing, and then to get about the business of reviewing these applications for permits to drill on federal land. There are thousands of them that are waiting. So when the president says, "Well, we've never had, we've got a record number of leases, but nobody's drilling on," that's because the Bureau of Land Management is sitting on these applications for permits to drill. That would send a strong signal. I think some permitting reform would send a signal where you knew that there was an end to the litigation for a pipeline that would move product to market, for example. How about just the attitude coming from the administration that the bridge to a transition can't be a short bridge. Nobody invests in short bridges, they invest in long bridges. I think, frankly, a better trade policy that recognizes that American energy, in concert with our allies, particularly in Europe, who is right now crying out for help, especially in the natural gas sector, obviously, as they head into winter, for a solution that comes from someplace other than Russia. And instead of seeking help from OPEC Plus or Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, let's get back to what we know, and that is that American energy is cleaner than most, and we know how to produce it. We become the exporter.
Senator, I've heard from lots of leaders, CEOs in the oil industry who will say that they've had plenty of conversations with the administration. Have you had conversations with them? What do you hear from them? What are they telling you?
Well, they often tell you what they think you want to hear. I've talked to several administration officials, particularly cabinet secretaries, who say, well, we're lifting the prohibition on leases, except they'll only provide 20% of the 100% that are available for leases. They'll say we want to go through judicial review quicker, but then they don't. They put up all kinds of roadblocks. In fact, in the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was in fact bipartisan, we put some pretty significant reforms in there, including some NEPA reforms for categorical exclusion on federal lands for natural gas, oil pipelines, even water energy related pipelines. But then they just find other ways to hold up things rather than the NEPA process. We also did one agency rule for transportation infrastructure that just led to a different set of guidelines or guidance from the Department of Transportation that puts up roadblocks. It just seems like there's an attitude that sends us, as you know, attitude sends signals to the markets as well. And we can do a whole lot better, and we ought to be doing a lot more.
Senator Cramer, you serve on a number of different committees, including armed services, banking, budget. It occurs to me that we could ask you about any story that's on the front page of the Wall Street Journal today, so maybe we should ask you a few other areas. When you look at the situation of what's happening in the Bank of England, the chaos that's been created in the market there, and you consider the banks here, are you convinced that there is not going to be a bleed over, that we're in a better position given the changes that have taken place, at least in the U.S. banking industry since 2008?
Yeah. Well, once again, the federal government seems to always try to find ways to mess up what would otherwise be a pretty good thing. So taking as an example, comptroller of the currency, the FDIC, the Federal Reserve itself, CFPB, we're always looking to them for some sort of guidance, and yet what they generally send into the marketplace is alarm. As an example, the ESG movement, getting back sort of to energy and a number of other things. These nominees that come before the banking committee that I sit on have anywhere from strong to radical views that send, again, bad price signals, treating every bank as though they're all J.P. Morgan Chase. I come from a state that's largely community banks and credit unions, and they just add more and more layers of bureaucracy and compliance and regulation that stifle, making them have larger balance sheets than they ought to have. They ought to be using more of that money into the marketplace to supply rather than just provide demand. So I worry a lot, frankly, about over consolidation and over regulation. With regard to England, though, I think what England is experiencing and what a lot of Europe is experiencing is something that we should be able to avoid as America, both in the banking sector as well as the energy sector.
One thing we can't escape is inflation. We've got a consumer inflation number that's coming out on Thursday of this week. It's why the Federal Reserve has been raising rates so quickly, so rapidly. What do you think about those inflation numbers, and what do you think about the Fed's moves to try and curb inflation by continuing to raise rates?
Well, I'm in the camp, and I don't even know that it's a debate anymore, that the Federal Reserve was way too slow and way too dramatic. Had they started sooner with more modest increases, I think that we could have avoided where we are. The problem is we are where we are. And I have some empathy and some sympathy for the Fed's moves, these 75 basis points moves to try to curb inflation. The problem is it's fundamentally, in my mind, the worst of the choices. I would prefer that we look at the supply side of the ledger, work more on the supply side, gets us, again, back to energy and American energy jobs and providing a better supply chain, if you will. But in the meantime, the Fed's job is, of course, to try to curb demand. I hate that we're there, but I think that they're doing what they have to do. And I, for one, am not second guessing that at this point. Whether they continue at this pace and for how long remains to be seen. But it seems that inflation and the Fed's response is helping lead to some form of a recession. And just hopefully we can keep it short and not quite so dramatic.
Senator Cramer, thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks, Becky.